All that each of us has to do is sit in silence and know what part of the plan our bit is. That's all we need. What Quakers offer is a space where people can do this. Or if people aren't by a Quaker meeting, they can join an online group. Or even if that doesn't work, we've got methods, we've got techniques that people can use to understand what their part of getting us out of the mess that we're in and towards a better world is. And that's what we offer. That's what's going to get us out of the mess on a global scale. Yes, campaign's good. Yes, advocacy good. Yes, communication's good. But ultimately, it's the spiritual space that allows people to know what their vocation is, and that vocation towards good. Secular NGOs can't do that. Media can't do that. Political parties can't do that. We can.
Thrilled to be joined in this episode of Quake It Up by Tim G, General Secretary of Friends World Committee for Consultation. And I was telling you, Tim, before we started recording, that I had to write that down because I always get that acronym wrong. I can never get it right. Thank you so much for joining us on this December evening. We met, didn't we, in the yearly meeting, which was really cool. Met a lot of my Quaker heroes that day, you being one of them. So thank you for spending that time to talk to me. We've got a lot to talk about, but I think first off, I said right at the very beginning, I want to know what FWCC is, what your role as General Secretary is, and how this affects Quakers everywhere. Do you reckon you could maybe start by unpacking that one for me?
Well, maybe I could start with Quakers everywhere and work from there. There's Quakers in about 100 countries of the world. And there are about 100 yearly meetings, so it's about 100 kind of groupings of Quakers. And those don't exactly map onto each other, but we do have this handy number of about 100. There's various traditions. You get, as you've shared on this channel, there's the kind of relatively liberal Quakers like you might find in Britain or Australia or New Zealand. You get more evangelical Quakers, you get more mainline Quakers, you get more conservative traditional Quakers. You even get holiness Quakers. And FWCC, the Friends World Committee for Consultation, is the organisation. It's kind of like the umbrella body that connects all of these different kinds of Quakers in the world family of friends. As General Secretary, it's my job to try and hold this all together, which involves a good deal of visiting, a good deal of relationship building. It does involve some organising some big events now and then. We have big get-togethers. And we have things like World Quaker Day, moments when we can feel all together, even when we're physically in different places.
So I suppose the question that I get when looking at Quaker, even Quakers in Britain, but when you spread that across the world is, and I think this is probably going to be something that we're going to be talking about a lot today, is there is so much diversity in Quakers, and you just listing some of them there. As the umbrella organisation, how does that work effectively? What are maybe some of the challenges and some of the joys as well of maybe being part of such a diverse group of people?
I think there are about three things that most Quakers around the world would have in common. Certainly most kind of organised groupings of Quakers. One is a direct experience of the divine, unmediated experience of the divine. Although what the divine is experiences of that might be different in different places. We, of course, have our history in common, and most Quakers in most places are working for peace or justice, or peace and justice in one way or another. If there was a faith that only had those three principles, I think I'd still be interested in it. But yeah, there's lots of diversity, there's lots of complexity, because it's an organisation made up of humans. It's an organisation made up without a central human authority. We're not a command and control kind of faith group. So that means that as Quakerism has travelled around the world, it's kind of absorbed different aspects of the different cultures where it's been. But I believe that there's that of God in everyone. And when people come together, we get to experience that of God in one another. And that's a very powerful experience. I'm always reminded of the words of Jesus, where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am also. And I experience that with every group of Quakers that I go to visit. There's something very real at the centre of all of these kinds of Quakerism, and it's also there when we all come together, and that's what it's all about, really.
With like FWCC, then, what is it? We're talking about, we're using the term umbrella organisation, and we get this idea that it sort of looks after, has in its care all these yearly meetings. What does that mean in practice, though? So if we're looking at the mission statement or the goals of FWCC, what are they looking to do?
Well, we bring friends together in communications, in consultation, in worship, And we try to communicate our common heritage and our message to the world. So us having this conversation right now is part of fulfilling the role of FWCC. As with all of these things, we reach for metaphors like the umbrella. Of course, the traditional Christian metaphor is the body, the body of Christ. There's a wonderful, fairly large section in the letter to the Corinthians that kind of imagines, what the different parts of the body might be saying to one another. I think of the Friends World Committee as the connective tissue. We're the thing that kind of holds it together. That's how I see us, and that's necessary for a body to function.
We've been saying as well, about Quaker diversity and stuff, and I've been really thinking about this recently because I think sometimes I get comments about people who think, oh well, I don't think these sort of people should be Quakers, or I think Quakers are only like this and not like this. I've been slowly coming to the opinion that without diversity, I'm not sure if Quakerism makes sense. I think it's actually really important for the way that I don't think the Quaker message works if we don't allow for the diversity that, especially liberal meetings that we do have. But even what you're saying about bringing these different meetings together in a diverse way, I think this is a very Quaker thing to do in a way that I don't think we see in other denominations. I've got a bit more to say about that, but I just want to see what you think about the importance of diversity in our meetings and in our international bodies as well.
Well, it's a fact that there are all these different kinds of Quakers, and all of these groups are Quakers. So, kind of, in some respects, there's not that much point kind of trying to put up a fence around dividing who is or who isn't, because everybody is. There's a phrase I like, which is about, if you want to keep the flock together, don't build a fence, build a well. As I mentioned before, when we come together, something very special happens. And I mean, I find that if I talk with somebody who I'm kind of got quite a lot in common with, I always get something from it. But if I talk to somebody who I don't have a lot in common with, or is maybe quite different, then I usually learn a lot more. And if I'm looking if that's a spiritual conversation, if I'm trying to get to know God better through that, if I'm looking for further insights on the divine, then I'm going to get kind of newer insights from somebody who's more different from me. So I found that tremendously spiritually enriching. I think that's something that is quite common to an experience of getting involved in an organization like FWCC, because it's all about these kinds of interactions. I also believe in peace. My starting point, and maybe we'll talk about spiritual journeys later, but I had a powerful experience when I was 16, which it was not long after the September the 11th, and I thought that killing thousands of people is wrong. And it's wrong in New York, and it's wrong in Afghanistan, and it's wrong in Iraq, and it's wrong anywhere else. So I've been interested in peace ever since. How that links back to FWCC is Quakers aren't fighting each other. They argue with each other sometimes, but they're not fighting with each other. But this practice of building and feeling a genuine unity with people who linguistically, culturally, politically, in some ways religiously, certainly theologically, might be different from each other, is a wonderful training ground for becoming peacemakers. So even within Quakerism, we have this training ground that can give us the tools of learning peace so that we can be better peacemakers in the wider world.
Certainly talk about that more, I'm sure. I just feel that Quakers, I think, are really honest about the diversity of and we have to be, because it's so obvious. Like we've got non-theist friends, and we have fully fledged Christian Quakers, and so we have to be honest about it. But I do think that there is a lot of diversity in any large or any denomination, large or otherwise. I think, and the fact that we are open about it, we're saying that no, we're not trying to hem you in with creeds. We're actually saying no, you can be where on the journey where that you're going on, and that is fine, and you're not always necessarily going to be there, and it allows for this journey, this path, this way, which we talk about in Quakerism, which is not, we're not saying that you're at the end point just yet, or ever reach that end point. What do you think the challenges are for FWCC at the moment? What are you guys working on or looking to make better in global Quakerism?
Well, there are always challenges in the ways that we're different, At our last World Plenary, we managed to operate in 3 languages, but there's a lot more languages than that in the world. And that means that if you speak English, Kiswahili, or Spanish, you're going to have a better experience of an FWCC event than if you don't. So working on language diversity is really important to us, language inclusion. The same kinds of divisions and differences that exist within other denominations exist within global Quakerism as well, for example, on sexuality, even different approaches to the Bible. If you look at some of the other big denominations, global denominations at the moment, they're having arguments, conversations about those at the moment. Those exist within Quakerism as well. The difference is because we're the Friends World Committee for Consultation, the whole point in this is that we consult. It's actually very rare that we would kind of put out a statement on a thing that we're all in agreement in. We do sometimes, but it's relatively unusual because there isn't a kind of a globally defined creed, as you say, that everybody has to sign up to. So those are some challenges, but there's also kind of wonderful opportunities. So, I'd say in this part of the world, there's a strong emphasis on peace in the world, making peace in the world. If you go into a Quaker meeting in Britain, you will hear somebody talk about peace, or if not, you'll see a poster about peace. There'll be something about peace in the world. And if you go to a Friends Church or Quaker meeting, say in Kenya or Burundi, they probably will be working for peace in some way, but you're going to hear a lot more about the peace of Jesus Christ. Now, peace in the world and the peace of Jesus Christ are, of course, part of the same thing. So trying to bring them together and allow us to have that conversation together, and for people who emphasize one to know more about the other and to learn from one another, is another wonderful opportunity. So we have these differences, but by coming together, we can be enriched and we can be better Quakers. So in 2030, we've actually made this decision now. 2030 will mark the symbolic 2000th anniversary of the beginning of Jesus's ministry, of the Sermon on the Mount, of Jesus saying, "Blessed are the peacemakers." So we're going to have a World Plenary in 2030. We haven't decided where yet, but we're going to have one, and it's going to be themed "Blessed are the peacemakers." And part of the thinking is about talking about peace in all of its meanings, in its worldly meaning and its spiritual meaning, and kind of exploring that as a whole.
Maybe explain to viewers who don't know what is a World Plenary. What does that involve?
So every few years, we bring World Quakerism together. As I said before, there's about 100 yearly meetings in the world, so that's the kind of formal organization of Quakers. And each of these, the vast majority of those are affiliated to FWCC. And every so often, nominees from these all come together in a place. It is a massive undertaking to put together something like this. But it has a great effect for the people who go. It has a great effect for the people who go when they come back for their local meetings that they've come from, to be kind of bringing back that experience and that connection with the world, the wider society of friends. But it also has a really good effect for kind of the things that we do together, because that's where we kind of decide the things that we're going to do together. Right now, we're working off a whole load of momentum of decisions that we made last year. So a lot of our projects that we're currently getting on with, and which are going well, are largely because we all got together last year and we decided, yes, this is what we want to do. So yeah, they're wonderful things. The next big one's going to be in 2030, but we are also planning an online conference, a global online conference in 2027.
Are these things that anyone can go to, or is it things that you'd need? Is it like representatives from meetings, local meetings, area meetings, whatever go? Is it basically like a massive yearly meeting?
Yeah, it's a bit like a massive yearly meeting. Well, it's a meeting of yearly meetings, principally, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Every yearly meeting is invited to send nominees. And last year, I think we had 95 yearly meetings. We had people from 95 yearly meetings. I said before that there only are about 100, so that was really a significant spread. But there are usually places for folk who aren't nominated by their yearly meetings to take part as well. They usually have to self-fund. Nowadays, we have hybrid meetings, and taking part online costs a lot less than getting yourself to a place. It's a well that you can come and drink from.
So what have been some of your, if you were to think of maybe like your top 3 experiences as General Secretary, what have you really enjoyed doing? Maybe the places that you visited that were particularly different, meaningful?
So around this time last year, I was in Nairobi, and I was there to welcome some of the 500 new Quakers coming into membership of Nairobi Yearly Meeting that day. It was absolutely brilliant. It was so joyful. They danced into meeting. We cheered them. This was spread across the churches in Nairobi. And they complete a 2-part course to become full members, which I think is a really good idea, by the way. And yeah, it was just so joyful, and it was this kind of, I want to say it's how Quakerism could be, but of course it's how Quakerism is. This is the majority country of Quakerism. This is the majority type of Quakerism. And it was such a joy to participate in that and feel a full part of that, and welcome people into a global community of friends, not just their yearly meeting. So I think that would be one. Yeah, staying in Africa, Burundi is one of the countries where Quakerism is really growing. There's a particularly large Friends Church in the centre in Bujumbura, which is the capital of Burundi. And there are 9 choirs that sing together there on a Sunday morning. And when somebody explained to me that, when you come to church or to meeting, you kind of get channeled into one of the choirs, basically, and you get to meet, students or women or men. I can't remember what all the categories are, but it's just this really good system for kind of quite quickly meeting some people who are quite like you and kind of finding a community within the bigger whole. So that's probably another highlight. Maybe I'll choose a third highlight. Part of my work is interchurch work, so I'm sometimes like the representative of international Quakers to other international Christian bodies. And I went to see the Mennonites earlier this year, who are quite similar to Quakers in quite a lot of ways. And appear to have come up with a lot of the same ideas about 100 years earlier. So it's very humbling. And there appears to be no direct relationship between them getting these sets of ideas and us in Germany and Switzerland and those countries, and us getting these ideas in England about 100 years later. But yeah, I went to their World Conference, and yeah, I was just welcomed so warmly. I was given some space to speak from the front. I felt a real affinity with them, and that allowed me to feel part of a larger body of Christianity, to have the humility that, once upon a time, I think Quakers believed we are the body of Christ and nobody else is. And I think we've now learned that we are part of the body of Christ, and we take joy in our Christian brothers and sisters, especially when we can work together for justice and peace.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Is it all right if we could we talk about African Quakerism a bit? Because I think it's something that I've had no experience of that at all. Apart from when there were representatives of yearly meetings in Africa coming to yearly meeting this year, and we worshipped together, and there was singing and stuff, and that I got very spiritually excited, and that was very different. But it's something that I think, in Britain, and maybe in the West more generally, if we look to America as well, we kind of don't know. I don't feel we know enough what Quakerism is like over there, and maybe how it's different, how it's similar, and as you say, what we can learn to make Quakerism as we think it could be over here as well, and it is living over there. So I'd be really interested on your views on that and what you've taken away from it.
So I mentioned at the start that globally we have the kind of liberal type of Quakerism, which tends to be unprogrammed, tends to be more silent. You have the kind of more programmed form, kind of that looks a bit more like mainline Christianity. There's evangelical forms. And there are other forms as well, like holiness Quakerism. Now, all of those, certainly 3 of those, and probably more, exist within Africa. So you get so in Ghana or in South Africa or Southern Africa, more broadly, you would find a kind of Quakerism that would be very, very familiar to what you're familiar with from Britain. That exists in Kenya as well, but by far and away the majority type of Quakerism in Kenya is more mainline. You've got the teachings of justice and peace, but very clearly Christ-centric, increasingly Pentecostal, actually. which actually theologically is not terribly far away from Quakerism because it's about direct experience of the Holy Spirit. A service there would usually be about 3 hours. There'll be a lot of singing to begin. There'd be testimonies. There'd be a sermon. There'd be some formal. There'd probably be kind of two choirs. There'd be the praise and worship group. There'd be the choir. So they would alternate. And there'd be a collection usually. There are also lots of notices and announcements. So that's something that's familiar and similar in Quakerism around the world. From the outside, it looks quite different. But going and being part of it, it's just like, I think any Quaker from Britain or any Quaker from anywhere else that might be listening to this, I hope they would have the same experience. You'll just be welcomed. They'll say, come on. Oh, yes, great. You're a Quaker from such and such a country. Great. You'll just be welcomed in. There's no quiz at the door. Can you name X, Y, or Z Bible verse? No. Do you know the words to the songs? No, you'll just be welcomed as you would be in a Quaker meeting in Britain. It feels like going and visiting a family member. And in some spiritual sense, it is. We use that analogy a good deal in the FWCC. We often call it the World Family of Friends, and that really is how it feels when you go and visit in other countries.
So you're saying so to get membership, there's it's sort of like in the Catholic Church where you kind of have to go through a program in order to before you reach membership. What do you know what they do particularly in that? What is it that they are doing on that course? And do you think and do you think that should be something that we should be doing in the UK as well?
So I know that it involves a good deal of Bible and knowing the Bible, and it involves a good deal of Quakerism and knowing the structures of Quakerism and knowing the history of Quakerism. I think both of those are very good things to know about. Sometimes you could see a course, as a barrier, and it works in exactly the opposite way. It works as a bridge. Someone turns up, they want to know what's this thing about. They want to know what's this Bible you're talking about. They want to know what's this Christ that you're preaching about. They want to know who are Quakers and how are they kind of similar or different to other denominations. And they get all that served up on the plate. As I say, it felt like a kind of graduation, like people had brought their aunties, their uncles, their whoever, just so joyful that they'd completed this class. And, we're having a kind of baptismal experience without the use of water. And we're so joyful to be part of this Quakerism that we're part of. Now, I mentioned this in my Backhouse lecture, but when I joined, I felt that excited. Even though I grew up Quaker, but I chose Quakerism. I was very happy when I completed the process, and I got I got a letter when I was sitting on my own in the room in my bedroom. I was like, no, it's just like a slight sense of anticlimax. I was like, at least have a round of applause. I don't know what to meet it. They asked if I wanted to be the treasurer, which is not my project. Lovely meeting, by the way. They welcomed me very well. I'm not complaining. But what I am saying is that amongst the unprogrammed type Quakers, I think we could do more to provide a kind of bridge in to answer the questions that people have got, and then to celebrate people when they arrive. And I think some kind of course would be the ideal way to do that.
Yeah, I think there's something about the unprogrammed form of Quakerism where anything that you can hold on to and consider some not sort of like a relic or something or some any form of ritual, it has to go. You want to be a member, fine, you'll get a letter. That is fine. That is enough. If it's anything that you can I don't know, tangibly do something that has to be taken away. Whilst I understand that, I think there's a human element that wants that sort of sense of occasion, maybe even. So how did you come to Quakerism? What was important to you?
My mum's a Quaker, my dad's a Quaker, my grandparents are Quakers, and there is a line going, a broken line, I have to say. It's not an unbroken line, but there is a line that goes back a long way. Growing up for me, Quakerism was just normal. It was just what we did. But it was nice. I'm not sure it was particularly the silence I went for, but I liked the people. I thought people at Quaker meeting were much nicer than people at school. I thought that adults treated me in a different way to the way that teachers treated me. It was just a wonderful, wonderful community to grow up in. I would recommend it to any parents or kind of potential parents. It's an open, liberatory, safe environment to explore what we think and who we are. Now, that does not sound like a conversion experience or anything like that. And I didn't have any. It was all kind of very just gentle, just nice. It was community. I did have something like a convincement experience. I was traveling in the United States from coast to coast, staying with Quakers along the way. So, I was involved enough to do that. I was familiar with biblical language. I'd sung hymns at school. I knew the various, some of the words. I'd read some of the books of the Bible, but I didn't have an inward experience. And I was in Arch Street Meeting, which incidentally I see is doing very well. I was in Arch Street Meeting in Philadelphia. I found myself meditating on the kindness of all of the strangers that had helped me along the way, on the love that was being sent to me by my friends and family at home. And then I felt in the meeting a loving force, a real tangibly, I really felt it, loving force flowing through the hearts of everyone in the meeting. And then I felt it extend out through the hearts of all people living. Suddenly, the language of God, and especially the idea that God is love, started making sense. Because that is a thing, that is a feeling. And that is a feeling that we can feel at Meeting for Worship. And we can feel it at other times as well. And that is a feeling that can lead us in our lives. And that is a kind of feeling where if we've got a question and we're not sure if this to, or a decision to make, I do that, shall I do that the other, we can kind of try and get to that place of love and hold the idea in that place of love. And I think it's a fact that if the world were organized along these principles of love, and if people consulted the love within themselves more regularly, the world would be a better place. I mean, so far so secular. I mean, I think a lot of people could get on board with that. But then I started reading the Bible again, and I could see that this Christ, this light, this seed, this love, this divine that people were talking about could well be. The way that people were talking about it seemed quite like what I'd experienced that day and what I've experienced many times since. So the Bible suddenly started making sense in a real kind of inward way, and I became confident and comfortable with the Christian language that is now very important to me. And I think I would wish that experience for others without imposing it on others, because my spiritual life has been so deepened by being able to kind of consult with or feel some affinity with people possibly feeling something very similar thousands of years ago. And the billions of people around the world who also feel this and also articulate it in this language. And of course, the majority language of the World Society of Friends. So more recently, they've not quite come to fruition, but I'm feeling some leading to try and kind of talk with relatively liberal, relatively unprogrammed friends who can sometimes be a little wary of Christian language, to kind of explore it in a joyful and gentle way, because I'd like to share the joy that it's brought me, and I think that other people might experience that joy likewise.
You've written and spoken really quite powerfully and really quite beautifully about this in especially this. So in this year, you had there was an excellent article that I read from you about Quakers and the Bible, and in a liberal Quaker setting, and you're also on Quaker Speak this year, which discussing the same things. What has it been? What was that like as an experience, and what were some of maybe the main topics that you've been thinking about when you've been discussing the Bible amongst friends and taking that into meeting with you?
Yeah, I think first, I mean, I talk about all kinds of things, and but it is quite encouraging and quite nice that it seems that kind of the couple of times that I've put something out there to do with the Bible, as you say, that Quaker Speak video, the BYM blog that I did, those seem to be some of the things that I'm saying that are kind of reaching the furthest. And that makes me think, oh, maybe I've got something to say here that people are interested in. Maybe I should keep doing this. There's a principle for me which kind of unlocks the whole Bible, and that is love God and love your neighbor. And if we believe Jesus when he says that the whole of the law and the prophets can be summed up by these words, love God and love your neighbor, then that means that the whole of the law and the prophets, and indeed the rest of the scriptures too, should be summed up by these rules. So that means that if anyone quotes scripture in such a way that doesn't lead towards loving God or loving their neighbor, they haven't read it right. I mean, it just seems so obvious. And, yet so much Christianity, or so many words said in the name of Christianity, do point towards hate or do point towards division. And I think someone needs to say, wait a minute, Jesus said love God and love your neighbor, and everything's summed up by this. So that means everything's summed up by this. So that means that if you're using these words for hate or division, you've got it wrong. Someone needs to say that. And I realized maybe one of those someones needs to be me. So I've been doing that.
Well, I've got to say, I think when I started Quaker and stuff, I kind of really wanted. I was starting to become more Christian in my understanding of Quakerism, but I kind of wanted to keep that aside because I kind of felt that I didn't want there to be that sort of division. I didn't want to put myself out there as a Christian Quaker because I thought, well, then maybe all like I'd get hate or something from the non-theist Quakers, or maybe not hate's a strong word, but maybe that they wouldn't then be interested in hearing what I had to say because he's a Christian, or I don't want to. But actually, I don't experience that amongst the liberal friends too much. I think there are Quakers for whom just Christianity doesn't. I don't get the complete I'm not interested. It just I know Quakers who aren't Christian, but yet they're still really really Quaker, but the Christian story doesn't really have anything to do with them. And I think this is something that I've realized, that I think Quakers are actually a lot happier with the Christian story than I think people that I thought. I thought it was like there's either these Christian Quakers and there these non-theist Quakers, and the non-theist Quakers don't want to be Christian and don't want to be told that they need to be. But that's not what we're doing either. I think though there's a lot more understanding and a lot more interest actually in that Christian narrative of Quakerism and how Quakerism could be understood in a Christian way than actually maybe I had originally perceived.
I agree. I mean, I've watched your videos on this and I like them. I hadn't come across the word non-theist Quaker until relatively recently, but I probably was one for 25 years. And I am very, very, very glad that I could be fully Quaker, fully part of this community, fully embraced, not quizzed on my thoughts, not quizzed on this, that, or the other, just loved and accepted. And when I found my way to Jesus, Jesus was ready for me. And I think there's this idea that when we label people, of course we do because it's useful, but we kind of think that they're the kind of these static things, when in fact we're all on a journey. If we believe that there's that of God in everyone, then we were listening for the divine in one another. And everyone's got something to say, whatever label they use for themselves. I suppose I'm somebody, if there was a fence, I've seen things from both sides of the fence, but I don't think there is a fence. I think we come together and we're interested in one another. And, this is where I am now. Where will I be in 20 years' time? I don't know. Can I say something else on the subject of labels? Something I appreciate about this kind of long-form format is the opportunity to kind of look at nuance. Because at the beginning of this, I talked about these kind of labels of Quakerism. One of the really nice things about working with real live people is, especially Quakers, is that they often kind of pull apart the labels as soon as you try to apply them. So, for example, in Northern Ireland, you would find people engaged in unprogrammed worship, but who are probably evangelical in theology. On the western side of the United States, you can find people whose form of worship looks quite evangelical, with songs and preacher and pastor and kind of summoning of the Holy Spirit and all of this kind of thing, but kind of very liberal on social issues. So once you meet real live people, you discover that the labels kind of stop working terribly well. They're useful as a shorthand because they demonstrate the broad variety. But ultimately, we're all people and we're all on a journey. My spiritual life has changed in the 4 years or so that I've been doing this job. Everybody's spiritual life is growing all of the time, hopefully, certainly changing all of the time. And so labels are useful as a shorthand, but they can sometimes be a hindrance as well.
Yeah, I think this is kind of what I've seen as well, is that you've got to. I think it comes from more creedal denominations, and that we feel this need to define ourselves as a finished product. But that's never the way, and that's not what Quakerism actually promotes at all. Isn't you're not finished, you're not done. And I might sit there feeling, yes, I feel like I've sussed Quakerism. I know exactly what it is, but life will happen, and my understanding of it might completely change, and you have to be open to that all the time. And so I agree. I think we give ourselves labels to try and understand ourselves, but then we realize that actually they're only helpful so far. And I think you're actually right, and especially in your role when you're seeing such varied friends, because even in a liberal Greek thing where you have like maybe someone who's on the non-theist side, someone who's on the more Christian side, they'll agree on an awful lot most likely. Whereas if you're dealing with someone from Nairobi, for example, versus someone from California, there's going to be a lot more variety and diversity, even if they both are maybe Christian Quakers. It's just going to be very different. So you talked about some of your favorite things that you come out that you find yourself going back to again and again as when you've been looking into the Bible. And you mentioned love thy neighbor, which has obviously been a very important term this year. Do you maybe want to talk a bit about what that's meant for you, what and how that has been used this year amongst Quakers?
Sure. Well, I mean, love your neighbour has been our theme this year. It was the theme of World Quaker Day. World Quaker is a day when Quakers in all different parts of the world can do something together and take photos of it and put it online and see other people doing it. And there's always a theme, and this year was World Quaker Day, a very unifying theme. A few years ago, it might have just felt a bit like ordinary, a bit like, oh yeah, love your neighbour. Of course, Quakers would say that. Of course, Christians would say that. Of course, lots of other people would say that for that matter. Oh, but this year, love your neighbour feels like countercultural. It feels radical. Like there's so many messages telling us not to love our neighbours. And some of these messages are even given in Christian sounding language. As well as bringing Quakers together, part of the thought process was we've got something to say to the world, and it's not something new. It's something very, very old indeed, but it's something relevant, and it's something that could fix the mess that we're in if we love our neighbours as ourselves. It could inform policy making. It could inform the way that we see each other. And if we look back at the origins of the many crises that the world is currently facing, you can see these many opportunities that people have had to choose loving their neighbour or not loving their neighbour, and they've chosen not loving their neighbours, and it's led to worse crisis. And in some ways, it sounds a bit glib. It sounds a bit, why can't we all be nicer to each other? But I don't think it is. I think it gets to the heart of things. I think it's radical. Radical means to go to the root. You can read a big, long policy paper from this or that NGO, and I'm sure it's going to be brilliant. I think the root of it is something spiritual, and the change that we need, I think, is something spiritual. I think we need a mass inward transition from fearing our neighbours and seeing ourselves as different from one another to loving our neighbours and seeing ourselves as members of one another. But I do believe that the light exists within every person, not just within every Quaker. And I do believe that light has the ability to teach people that itself. So then I asked myself, well, what's my role in that? And I'm like, well, perhaps I could have a role in trying to kind of create the environment where someone might be receptive to that inward message. And one way of doing that is reminding people of what Jesus said many times, which is love your neighbor as yourself.
It makes me think with neighbor, a neighbor is obviously someone who you don't choose, isn't it? Because you don't have any choice as to who lives around you. They're just there. And so it's not about love your friends, because that's a given. You choose your friends to an extent, and it's easy to love them because you're probably friends with them because you have similar interests and so on. But a neighbor is someone who's just come into your life, and they're there and they're next to you, and they're also in very close proximity to you. I think that can create a lot of the issues that people have. But when people are put next to each other, that don't necessarily get on, that haven't chosen to spend time with each other. And how do you deal with that? How do you deal with these interruptions into your life, these people who you don't expect, and the difference as well? Because we assume, therefore, that these aren't going to be people who we would necessarily straight away recognize. I think it was a powerful message, and I think in a way a lot more unifying as well, because I think sometimes the message of Quaker Week can be a bit too can be very Quaker focused, right? So I think, and that's great because we need to be ourselves. But I think this one's something that we can actually unite people around, and I think that's really good as well. Did I ask about what's been your favorite Quaker Day focus? Or is it, or would it simply be Love Thy, this one, or have there been ones that you've been really, really like? Think that's really, and maybe could I ask you as well? And if you know why is Quaker Week in October?
Oh, yeah. Well, I can do that first because that's straightforward. So there is such a thing called World Communion Sunday, which is when many of the World Communions, we are one of about 25 or something Christian World Communions, encourage their members to remember that they're part of a world family. So kind of our way of doing World Communion Sunday was World Quaker Day. And that's always on the first Sunday of October. So that's the origin of it. And I suspect that's might be why Quaker Week happens at that time in the UK, but I don't know that for sure. In Britain, should I say. Yeah, let's see. So I've done 4 World Quaker Days now. Our first one was on being the Quakers the world needs, and it involved going and visiting another Quaker meeting, and that worked phenomenally well. Lots of people went and visited another Quaker meeting, another friend's church. There was lots of online visitation. At my dad's Quaker meeting, in Disley in Cheshire, they had a visitor, I think from Burundi. That was quite exciting. You're sitting there in Disley, you've got someone on the screens from East Africa. And there was lots of small. That's kind of one small piece. People really it was a kind of experience of worshipping together. So yeah, that worked really well. It was just after the pandemic restrictions had been lifted, so lots of people wanted to go and visit each other. The next 2 were about Ubuntu, the idea that I am because you are, or I am because we are. Those worked well. That was the theme of the World Plenary. And then this one that just gone, we think is the one that's reached the most people. Love your neighbour. So it really caught on. Now, we're currently deciding for next year. We've not 100% decided the
Breaking
theme.
news. You heard it here first.
Can I tell you a story? And then this might inform World Quaker Day next year. Before I did this job, I worked for various non-profit organisations, lots of household name NGOs trying to address climate change and poverty and tax dodging and all kinds of trying to tackle all kinds of bad things. And I was in a series of increasingly senior posts. And we ran some good campaigns according to the textbook. We even scratched up some policy changes. But what we didn't do was avert the crises that the world is currently facing, which is really what we were trying to do. We came up with good recommendations, well-researched, excellent policy documents, costed, achievable, and they didn't get adopted. So I had to ask myself, is this what I want to do for the rest of my career? And before answering that question, I had to ask myself, well, why is it that, I've spent 20 years trying to stop these current crises from happening, and yet they're happening and they're getting worse. And I found the parable of the sower really helpful in thinking about that. That's the story told by Jesus in which there's a sower, somebody sowing seed and sows seed several times, but it falls on hard ground, it gets eaten up by birds, it gets choked by thorns, and it eventually finds the fertile ground. And at that stage, I thought of myself as attempting to be like a sower. I was kind of throwing all these seeds of good ideas around the place, but they were reaching thorny ground or being eaten up by birds or being strangled by weeds. They weren't getting anywhere. So I felt like I wanted to shift. I wanted to shift to asking, why is it that our hearts are not receptive to ideas which will bring peace, which will bring greater equality, which will increase the standard of life for most people? And I thought I wanted to work on the heart. I wanted to ask, what are the thorns? What are the birds that are eating up the seeds? Is racism, is white supremacy a thorn that is eating up the seed, that's strangling things? Is sexism and gender inequality and the idea that that's okay, patriarchy, is that something inside our hearts that's not making our hearts not fertile soil? So that's kind of where I was a few years ago. I think I've become more humble since then, because I don't think I'm the sower. I think God's the sower. But I do think I've got a role in helping prepare people's hearts and helping prepare my own heart for the light, for the kingdom that will lead us towards the kingdom of heaven, towards peace, towards justice. So that's kind of how I see my mission now. And I think that's one of the reasons that I try to kind of gently encourage Bible study. It's one of the reasons that I would invite anybody watching this to try out a Quaker meeting, because that's a way of, like, a meditation you could do is asking, okay, well, if my heart's a garden, what's in my garden? What are the weeds? How can I make my heart into fertile soil so that the seed can be planted in it? The seed being the word of God or the guidance of Jesus. And then once that seed is planted within us, what is the light that it needs? What is the living water that it needs to grow? How do we nourish that? And kind of encouraging that as an inward process. So I'm still absolutely committed to changing the world. It's just, I don't think I could call myself an activist anymore. I don't think I could call myself a campaigner anymore. I'm trying to be a faithful Christian, and that's the contribution that I feel that I'm called to at this point, which is a long way of saying that the theme of World Quaker Day 2026 might have something to do with the parable of the sower, but we'll see.
Maybe some seeds involved. I think the good thing that I found, I think that was the in for me, was that I think there were certain passages in the Bible which you can just sit with and you can play with and you can be interpretive and imaginative with, even if you don't believe in the Christian narrative. Like, there are things that you can sit with and think, well, as you said, like, okay, well, what are the seeds? What are these? Who are the birds? What's the ground? What would make for fertile ground? I think anyone can ask themselves these questions, even if they don't think of it from a Christian perspective. And I'd be very interested to see where that goes in 2020. I think this is a question that I have as well, because obviously we're meeting in December. So we've got 2025 nearly done, and obviously looking then forward to 2026. So do you want to maybe think about, from a Quaker perspective, from the General Secretary's view from the umbrella organization of World Quakers, what do you think are the journeys that Quakerism has gone through in 2025, and where do you think we're going into 2026?
I mean, FWCC has been through a journey this year. We lost our clerk at the beginning of the year. Our clerk died.
Yes.
I don't know when this is going to go out. If it's going out in January, we'll be round about the anniversary of that. It was very early January 25. So that was a big shock. It was unexpected. And we miss him. And his abiding prayer, his abiding wish was that the light of Christ would lead us and that people would know the light of Christ and allow it to guide us in our lives. And at his funeral, it was abundantly clear that he'd helped many people to experience that. And even at the funeral, the presence was just so strong. And I think it has led us through the year, which is exactly what he would have wished, exactly what he did wish. And I stopped to remind myself of that periodically. Now, I don't know if that's an experience for the whole of Quakerism. I don't think it is, but it's certainly a very significant event in the life of the Friends World Committee for Consultation and the people close to it. Now, 2026, I think in some ways is going to be a transition year towards 2027 when we have this online conference. That's the kind of follow-on from the World Plenary. It's the place where people come back and they share, what they've been doing since on the calls that we made when we were together last year. And it's also preparation for this 2030 idea, which I mentioned before. FWCC has already committed. We're going to have a gathering in 2030 themed Blessed are the Peacemakers. But, if we're serious about making peace, and it needs to be bigger than Quakers. If Quakers work slowly, then you should see how churches work together. Very slowly indeed. Slow doesn't mean bad. And I think that if in 2030 people revisited the Sermon on the Mount, or before ideally, and really took it seriously, people who call themselves followers of Jesus, people who are followers of Jesus, really took in their heart what would it mean to follow the words that Jesus actually said, the longest continuous passage of Jesus's words. But yeah, I think we're allowing ourselves to dream big right now. We're asking, okay, well, we're committed as Quakers. We're pretty small as Christian groups go. How big could we make this? And if we want to go big, we've got to work on a lot of relationships to make that work. And that's going to be another theme in 2026. So you heard it here first.
As you said, Quakerism is small. Quakerism in the UK, is getting smaller, and in many ways, obviously globally that's not the case, but in the UK we see it that way, and we remain a small group. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and I've argued that it's not about the main way; it's about the small narrow way. That's not normally the most worthwhile. But I suppose my question is, you've spoken before about the hope that you have for Quakerism and Quakers and what Quakers can do and bring. Would you mind sharing your thoughts as to where future Quakers are needed and why we're needed and what we should be doing more of?
Well, I'll start on numbers. As you say, globally, Quakers are growing. I watched a video from the 1980s when I was born, a year or so ago, and they said there's about 200,000 Quakers in the world. It's like, oh, wow. Well, today, at the last count, it was 400,000, and we're strongly suspecting that at the next count, it's going to be quite a bit higher than that. The overall picture is growing kind of in line with trends in different countries across the world. What do we have to offer? Well, of course, we do have our campaigns and our advocacy, which is all good. I'm glad that we do it. I'm glad that we prioritize it. I'm glad that we resource it. But I don't think that that's the most important thing that we offer. I think the most important thing that we offer is a space where people in this country, in stillness, in other countries through other means, can find their way through to an inward voice who can lead them in a path that leads them to do good. One of my previous job titles was campaign strategy lead. So it was my job to kind of map out on pieces of flip chart paper, this person influences that person. And we weren't allowed to do anything in the organization that I worked for unless we'd kind of mapped out exactly how this action would lead to our overall result. And I now think that whole way of thinking is just, it doesn't work. No human being, no single human being, or even no group of human beings has the plan that's going to get us out of the polycrises that we're in. But God does. So all we don't have to have the big plan. All that each of us has to do is sit in silence and know what part of the plan our bit is. That's all we need. What Quakers offer is a space where people can do this. Or if people aren't by a Quaker meeting, they can join an online group. Or even if that doesn't work, we've got methods, we've got techniques that people can use to understand what their part of the plan is, what their part of getting us out of the mess that we're in and towards a better world is. And that's what we offer. That's what's going to get us out of the mess on a global scale. Yes, campaign's good. Yes, advocacy good. Yes, communication's good. But ultimately, it's the spiritual space that allows people to know what their vocation is, and that vocation towards good. Secular NGOs can't do that. Media can't do that. Political parties can't do that. We can.
It's amazing. I like that a lot. I think that the thing that I really value about Quakerism is that you're given time to do that your own way as well. You're not told how to do it. Your worship isn't done through actions, even. It's done through listening. And I think that's such a different thing. And I think we should talk about it more. And as I said, I think sometimes Quakerism can be a bit too Quaker social action can sometimes be a bit too flashy and a bit too oh, that's what we all focus on. But that's actually what I think should be the flashy thing about Quakerism.
Can I say thank you for your ministry of this channel? I've watched a good number of the videos. I haven't watched all of them, but I think they're brilliant. I'm glad that someone's doing it, and I'm glad that person is you. I don't know how on earth you've managed to absorb all of that information from those books behind you, kind of channel it through your heart, put it up to your head and put it out through the internet. But that's a wonderful thing that you have, and it seems to have been mixed with the all-important ingredients of the leadings of the light. So yeah, thank you for doing that, and thank you for inviting me on and the other people that you've brought on. And I'm sure that good will come of it, and we may hear of some of that, and some of that we will never know.
Thank you very much, and it's been a joy to have you on. And I think this is something that it's the development of it. It's really I just started it because I just felt I had to, and here I am, and it's become this whole thing. And I'm talking to Tim G, and that's it's super cool, because as I said, I've absorbed so much about Quakerism since finding it, and now I'm in this position when I'm talking to the people that I've been reading about and watching, and it's just incredible. I've loved it a lot. I've got some quick fire questions then. My first question is everyone's favorite question. Who's your favorite Quaker, Tim, and why?
I've got a lot of time for Margaret Fell. Now, FWCC got set up in 1937, but arguably you could say that she was the first secretary of a Friends World office.
Yeah, I suppose.
She did run the office, and it was very quickly international, and she did reach people in different countries and connect people in different countries. So I feel some kind of connection with her because of that. Even though there's no direct link, I do feel that I'm kind of trying to continue the ministry that she began. And she was so brave, and she was such a good writer. I've just finished doing a summary of Women Speaking Justified. I tried to get it into 21 points. It's just so well argued, and she's so witty, and Quakerism wouldn't exist if it wasn't for her. So I think I'm going to say Margaret Fell.
Is that going to be out in like a blog form or in a book form, or
I'm
is
looking
that
for
just...
someone to publish it at the moment.
Yes, they must do it. No, that would be really cool. No, I think I talked about Margaret Fell recently. Well, actually, this is a video that has been filmed. Whether it's out or not, I don't know. We'll see what happens. If it's out, I'll put a link up. But talking about whether or not who was the founder of Quakerism, and obviously George Fox gets a lot of votes in that regard. But I argue that Margaret Fell is also quite legitimately also very much a leader, and certainly the driving force of the organization and the maintenance of early Quakerism. Absolutely. So a lot of respect here as well for Margaret Fell. Next question: if you had to recommend one Quaker book, which Quaker book would what's if you just your favorite one, not necessarily beginner's guide or anything, just the Quaker book that meant the most to you or affected you the most?
I just finished reading a wonderful summary of Berkeley's apology called Berkeley in Brief, which is a Pendle Hill pamphlet, which is available for free online. You can also get it from Friend's House and Pendle Hill and other places that sell Pendle Hill pamphlets. It just gets to the essence of Berkeley's case for what Quakerism is, how it's different and how it's similar, just so well. I think we could do very well to get back to Berkeley. But I know that even in the modern translation, it's hard going. But this Berkeley in Brief pamphlet, absolutely brilliant. I would recommend it to anybody watching this channel.
Big fan of Robert Berkeley as well. I have done a deep dive into all of his prepositions, but it is beefy. Like, you have to sit down and you have to commit to reading that. So I did not know that there was a brief version. I would hardly also recommend that because, well, actually, I don't know. I love what he says about Quakerism. I really do. I understand, obviously, he's speaking in the 17th century, so it is different. And like, there's the whole bit on music and all that sort of stuff. I don't necessarily believe in myself, but in terms of how he describes Quakerism, where he places Quakerism between different denominations and different, and how well he argues the case is just really cool. Like, he goes toe to toe with Luther and Calvin. He says, no, you're both wrong, and this is why, and it's great what he says. So no, I would definitely going to be looking up for that, and I'll try and if there's a link, I'll put it down below as well, because I think any self-respecting Quaker listener and viewer should maybe check that one out as well. You've travelled a lot. What was the most different, coming from a British Quaker perspective, what was the most different Quaker meeting you've ever been to, and what made it different, and what did you learn?
I've learned a lot by engaging with evangelical Quakerism, for example, which is not where I've come from personally or historically. And I suppose sometimes you can have moments in Quaker meetings where maybe something's said that makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. And that's an interesting experience, because the vast majority of FWCC Quakerism, I'm very comfortable with indeed, and my comfort zone has grown. So I have reflected after feeling a bit uncomfortable sometimes if something's said that, I don't agree with, and it's said from the front and there's no way of challenging it. I think what it's done is it's given me a sympathy for people who might be coming from that tradition or other forms of Quakerism, which are kind of not the mainstream type or mainline type, who might be feeling uncomfortable when they come into FWCC spaces, or indeed if they would come to Britain, come into a relatively liberal Quaker space. So yeah, what I take out of that experience of discomfort is an empathy for the feeling that somebody might have coming in the opposite direction. And it's my role and my responsibility to try and create a space which is comfortable enough that people can engage with it and discomforting enough that there's space for spiritual growth. And that's the kind of sweet spot that I go for. And it's only by kind of experiencing quite a lot of different types of Quakerism and kind of observing my own reaction to that I can then imagine what other people's inward experiences might be when they're coming into an FWCC space or when they're visiting a kind of Quakerism that's different from their own. So I don't agree with everything that I've ever heard in a Quaker meeting. I don't think there's anybody who does.
No.
But I always learn something inwardly. And that's the example I can think of in answer to your question.
Yeah, well, it does, and I think it kind of goes back to the start where we were sort of saying, I think we need this diversity in order to grow. Like if we're just in an echo chamber, then we're causing the same situation that that we're seeing in popular culture more generally. I've thought of another one. Again, and speaking to you because you've travelled a lot and you've seen a lot of Quaker meetings, I've seen so few in comparisons. Where has been maybe the most beautiful Quaker meeting house? And you can interpret beautiful however you wish. Beauty is is subjective.
Well, I mean, I love the old historic meeting houses in England, the likes of Jordan's and so on. I used to say that I've never come across a Quaker meeting that's covered in gold because and people laugh. They say, "Ha ha! Of course, a Quaker meeting house isn't covered in gold." Then I went to Brussels Quaker meeting, which is inside a historic house which was not previously Quaker. And there's some kind, I don't know the exact story, but there's some kind of like national protection of the wallpaper in the meeting, which is their Quaker meeting room. It's kind of like a historic monument, but inside the room, which means that they do actually have gold-coloured wallpaper in the Quaker meeting room. So there is a Quaker meeting which is arguably covered in gold, proving that there's almost always an exception to every rule.
That'd be a great Quaker pub quiz or Christmas quiz sort of a question. Yeah, no one would think of that. So Tim, it's an absolute honour to have you on. I was really, really thrilled that you agreed to come on and talk to me about FWCC, about the Bible, about loving thy neighbour, and giving us some excellent insights as to what is to come from FWCC and Quaker Day and so on. Thank you very much for taking the time. It really, really does mean a lot. Thank you. And everyone else, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. See you later.
Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up and the subscribe button to get more videos about Quakerism in the UK today. It really does help, and thanks once again.